Would you ask Dr. Smith to come back in, please? Right, Dr. Smith. Well, we'll see if there are any more questions for you, shall we?
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Millett?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just one short run of questions for you, Dr. Smith. In his evidence on day 96, when he came to assist the inquiry, Phil Clark told us, and I'm summarising his evidence at day 96, pages 104 to 115, that he was given unsupervised access to the BRE files for some 3 days in order to allow him to prepare his witness statement for the inquiry, after a time when his employment at the BRE had ceased. And I'm summarising, he told us that he had obtained access to the Celotex hard copy file and the electronic systems, namely the S drive, the V drive, and Anvil, among others, I think, and believed that the searchers hadn't retrieved everything. Now, he said that you were the one who afforded him access to those documents. Is that right?
We did arrange, yes, and Phil Clark did come to site. However, he didn't have unrestricted access to the electronic files. The IT team retrieved the files and copied them into the, a new area on the electronic system. So he wasn't accessing the originals, if you like. They were copies.
I see. And who supervised the IT team retrieving the files and copying them?
Well, the IT director at the time.
And where were the hard copy files? Where were they kept?
Well, they were kept on the system. Sorry, the hard copy files. So the hard copy files were kept in secure filing cabinets within a different area of the to where he was sitting. Yes.
And did Phil Clark have access? Was he afforded access to the hard copy files?
He would have seen. Yes, he would have seen some of the hard copy files.
Was he afforded unsupervised access to the hard copy files?
No, it wasn't unsupervised access. He was in an office that was an empty office with a desk, chair, and a desktop computer that was so he could access the electronic files. I think he also had a video recorder so that he could watch, although the video files were probably on USB sticks actually, that he could watch on the computer as well. And at all times, he was when he was in that office, there were people that were on site and stationed outside of the office. It was on the top floor, which was the management floor in BRE, and he was escorted to lunch and so on and so forth. I mean, he wasn't given free rein and free access to come and go as he pleased or any such thing.
How was he afforded access to the hard copy files?
I think.
Did he go to the cupboard and pull them out?
No, he did not.
Somebody go and help?
No, they were remote from where he was. So.
So how did he access the hard copy files?
So they would have been requested, and then they would have been retrieved by an administrator, or the other person that was involved in supervising him was Angela Richards, who was a very senior administrator involved with the compliance and quality team.
And during Phil Clark's physical possession of any hard copy files, was he at all times accompanied and supervised by somebody from the BRE?
He was supervised insofar as people were there, but whether they were sat there watching him, I don't know. I don't know whether that they would have been sat there sort of watching him every move that he made.
Right. Were you aware that he obtained and reviewed the Celotex hard copy test file?
I don't know specifically which files he did request and review. I mean, obviously he had to access the necessary materials in order to prepare and respond to his witness statement.
Did you discuss the Celotex test file or any other hard copy or electronic files with him?
Not at that time, no.
At that time being the 3 days he was afforded access?
Yes, correct.
Right. What safeguards were put in place to ensure the integrity of the files he was given access to? Start with hard copy. What safeguards were put in place to ensure the integrity of the hard copy files to which he was afforded access?
Could you please explain what you mean?
Yeah. What system was put in place to make sure that Phil Clark didn't take things out of the hard copy files and destroy them, to be blunt?
Well, I don't know how he could possibly have done that anyway, because he was in a room with nothing in there other than a desk and a chair.
Right. Where was he when he had access to the physical hard copy files?
In that room.
So they were brought to him, were they?
Yes.
And those files having been brought to him and put on the desk, one
Yes.
assumes the desk,
Yes.
what safeguards were put in place to make sure that what was brought to him remained intact, so that what was taken away was the same?
Well, he was in that room for all of the time, and when he had finished with the files, they were retrieved from him and returned.
Yeah. So when he
Yes.
was in that room for all of the time with the files, what safeguards did the BRE put in place to make sure that the integrity of the files, their completeness, as they had been brought to him, remained intact?
Other than somebody being stationed there and ensuring that he remained in the room with the files. I mean, that was the nature of...
I think the point Mr. Millett is inviting you to consider is this. What was there to prevent Phil Clark from taking a piece of paper out of the file and slipping it into his pocket?
Well, insofar as nobody sat there and actually watched him 100% of the time, I can't comment on that. That wasn't... Nobody sat there and watched him 100% of the time.
Right. And was the hard copy file not checked before he had access to it and then reviewed again afterwards to make sure it was the same as...
Well, they were certainly reviewed in the course of other people preparing their witness statements ahead of Phil Clark using them.
Why did you allow him unsupervised access to the test records of a test that was to be examined as part of the inquiry after such time as he'd ceased to be an employee of the BRE?
Well, I say it was done under restricted conditions, and we had no reason to believe that he would act in the way that you're suggesting.
Yes, thank you very much. Dr. Smith, those are all the prepared questions I have for you, other than one, and it's a question we sometimes ask witnesses of a particular status or stature in this inquiry, and it's this. You've sat there patiently answering my questions now for the best part of a week. Looking back on all of the material we've covered, and looking back on your whole time at the BRE, is there anything, in light of the Grenfell Tower fire, that you, sitting there now, on reflection, would have done differently?
I think I'd like to further reflect on that, and rather than just sort of make some off-the-cuff remarks here and now, if I may. It has been quite tiring and a long process, so I would prefer to reflect on that and
Well, I think
maybe make a submission later.
I don't think a submission will answer my question. I would like to have your reflections, even though they may be off the cuff, on oath in public now, please.
Well, I'm not prepared. I haven't prepared an answer to that, and I just feel sort of exhausted by this process, and I don't feel that I can really directly answer you right now.
Very well. Well, it remains for me to thank you very much, Dr. Smith, for coming to the inquiry and assisting us with your evidence. It's been extremely helpful to us in our investigations. So on behalf of my entire team, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Dr. Smith, it's right that I should thank you as well on behalf of all the members of the panel. We learn a lot from hearing from, particularly from senior people in organisations, about what happened. and it's very helpful to us to have your evidence. So we really are very grateful to you for coming along. I'm sorry that it has gone on a long time, and I'm sure it must have been tiring and at times difficult, but you should rest assured that we have found it very useful. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, and now you're free to go, of course.
Thank you.
Right, Mr. Millett. Now, I think we have another witness to come, do we not?
We do. But I'm going to ask you to rise, if I may.
Yes, for the
5
usual
minutes just
reasons.
Yes, for the usual reasons.
Yes, right. Well, we'll rise just for a moment, and perhaps you'd ask the usher to come and fetch us when you're ready.
Yes, thank you very much,
Thank you
Mr.
very
Chairman.
much.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, Mr. Millett.
Thank you. I now call Mr. Anthony Burd, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Burd.
Good afternoon, sir.
I understand you're going to affirm.
I am, sir.
Well, the words should be there on the screen in front of you. Would you read them out, please?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Would you like to sit down and make yourself comfortable?
Thank you.
Yes, Mr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Burd, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can I start by thanking you very much for attending the public inquiry here and giving us your evidence? We're very much grateful to you for assisting us in our investigations. If you have any difficulty understanding my questions or the way I phrase them, then I can ask the question again or put it in a different way. Please just say. We will take, in the normal way, scheduled breaks during the course of your evidence this afternoon and mid-morning on Monday. But if you need a break at any other time, please just let us know.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, please, to keep your voice up so that the transcriber who sits to your right can get down everything you're saying? A nod or a shake of the head doesn't work. You have to say yes or no, as the case may be, if that is your evidence. Now, you've provided the inquiry with one witness statement, which is at CLG 3019461. It's dated the 23rd of November 2018. Can we please have that up on the screen? CLG 3019461. Is that the first page of your statement?
Yes, it is.
Can we please go to page 75? There's a signature there above the date, 23rd November 2018. Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
Have you read this witness statement recently?
I have.
And can you confirm that its contents are true?
I can.
And have you discussed your witness statement or the evidence that you're going to give today with anybody before coming here?
Only my legal team.
Yeah. Now, you joined what was then, I think, the Department for Environment, Trade and the Regions in May 1998.
Yes.
And you were, at that time, I think, a senior fire safety professional, yes?
Yes.
That was your formal job title, was it?
It was.
Did you have any professional or scientific qualifications in relation to fire?
Yes, I did.
What were those?
So, in addition to studying aspects of fire within my building surveying degree, I also sat the entrance exams for full membership of the Institution of Fire Engineers.
And what happened as a result of sitting those exams?
I became a full corporate member of the IFE.
Right. And when was that?
96, 97.
Right.
Forgive me, you've asked specifically about fire. I also have other building studies and related sort of certificates. Are they relevant or not?
Oh, yes, yes. I
okay.
was coming on to those, but please do tell us.
No, so I have an ordinary national diploma in building studies. I have a higher national certificate in building studies. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in building surveying. And I've mentioned already the Institution of Fire Engineers, but I also sat entrance exams for membership of the Institute of Building Control.
And did you pass?
I did. Yes, I did. Later becoming a fellow of the Institute of Building Control, IBC. That was subsumed into the RICS, and I became a fellow of the RICS, making me a chartered surveyor. And I became a member of the Association of Building Engineers at the time, becoming thereafter a fellow of that association as well, making me a chartered building engineer as well.
Thank you. Now, you, I think, were the head of policy, technical policy at what became MHCLG from October 2007.
Yes.
And you stayed in that post until December 2013.
Yes.
What were your responsibilities in that role?
As head of technical policy, I led a team of technical policy experts overseeing the different parts of the building regulations. I was involved working with my team in terms of the letting of related research work supporting technical parts of the building regulations. I would support ministers in providing briefings and supporting them in parliamentary questions, etc. I would also undertake and support the Building Regulations Advisory Committee, as I was, in my capacity as Head of Technical Policy, supporting BRAC as the Building Regulations Advisory Committee, and I attended forums and similar, offering speaking engagements for events in relation to related building regulations.
Can we, well, does it follow from what you've just told us that you were, in effect, the most senior official below director level?
No, within that department, Deputy Director is the head of Building Regs Division, so
Right.
Bob Ledson was there, so I was one below.
Yes.
Yeah.
And let's see if we can put that into a visual format. Can you please go to CLG 000194662? What I'm putting on the screen for you there is an organogram that you've referred to at paragraph 9 of your statement. Now, it looks as if it's been printed in Ivrit, but I don't... Is there an English version of this, or a clearer version of it? I wonder if we could expand it. Well, it may not be possible. Is this the document that you exhibited to your statement?
I can't recollect.
Quite hard to tell.
Just a bit, sir.
Right. Let's not spend... we may have to come back to that document. It's done something slightly surprising on its appearance. Can we please go to your statement at paragraph 7? You set out some of your responsibilities there, some of which you've told us about already. And if we go to the foot of page 2 of your statement, you say there that as head of technical policy, I was responsible for leading a team of officials, civil servants on, and then if you turn the page,
Yeah.
All technical aspects of building regulations in England, including overseeing technical reviews of the statutory approved documents and any supporting guidance and their publication and dissemination. Now, after you left the department, I think you moved then to the BSI.
I did, yes.
Are you still working at the BSI?
I still work at the
Yes.
BSI.
And in your statement, I think you referred to your appointment to BRAC, as you told us, ending at the end of 2018. Was that right?
I am still a member of BRAC. That was I joined it in 2015,
Right.
and my period has been extended.
I see. Now, I'm going to focus, I think, on a number of specific topics during the course of your evidence, and I'll tell you what those are. First is contract CC 1924.
Yeah.
Then, second, the radar research. Thirdly, the revision of approved document B, leading to the publication of the 2006 edition in April 2007. And finally, the fire at Lacanau in 2009 and related matters. Now, I'm going to begin then with contract CC 1924 and the Garnet Court fire. Do you recall the fire that took place in a building called Garnet Court in Irvine on the 11th of June 1999?
Yes, I do.
You do. Were you aware of the circumstances of that fire at the time?
Yes, I was.
And would you agree that in the history of fire events in the United Kingdom, that fire was a major fire event?
Yes.
Now, this was a local authority block of flats, isn't it, which had been refurbished, in this case in 1991, in fact the same year as the fire at Knowsley Heights in Liverpool, yes?
Yes.
And it had been clad in GRP, glass-reinforced plastic panels, yes?
Yes.
Were you aware of that fact at the time of the Irvine fire in 1999?
No, I don't believe I was. It was through my involvement with the Select Committee and the run-up to the Select Committee that I started to read information further about the Knowsley Heights fire.
Right. And that, well, the Select Committee was in
Yes.
the summer of 1999, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
The hearings were.
The hearings were, but as part of my involvement in preparation for that, that's when I first learned about Knowsley Heights.
Did you know anything by, let's say, mid-1999, the date of the Garnet Court fire, about GRP panels which were used to clad Garnet Court?
No.
Did you recognise at the time that GRP panels were combustible?
I would have known that.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, after the Garnet Court fire, so far as we are aware, the BRE investigated and produced 3 reports into the Garnet Court fire. And I'll show you what they are on the screen. The first is BRE 3035377. And I think we need page 2 for that, please. This is entitled Fire at Garnet Court, Irvine on 11th June 1999, prepared for North Ayrshire Council and dated August 1999. You see that?
Yes.
And it's signed by Nigel Smithers on behalf of the BRE. Is that a document that you saw at the time, do you think?
I believe my then boss, the principal fire safety professional, Tony Edwards, to whom I worked to, it would have been provided to Tony and he would have shared it with me.
Right, thank you. Can we then go to BRE 000-35377, page 22, so same document, page 22, and this is a further report for North Ayrshire Council, dated April 2000, into the Garnet Court fire. And again, is that a document that you saw at the time?
I don't believe so.
And then finally, BRE 000-35375. This is the DETR project report prepared for you, dated August 2000. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And if you go to page 2, you can see that, again, it says prepared for you, yes, by Penny Morgan at the Fire Safety Engineering Centre at the BRE and approved by Nigel Smithies.
Yes.
Did you see that at the time? One assumes so because it's got your
I believe I did.
name on it. Now, the reports to North Ayrshire Council make numerous references to Class 0, and in particular the fact that the cladding at Garnet Court should have had a Class 0 classification, whereas the BRE's investigation of real fires report to the DETR, the one on the screen, makes no mention of Class 0 at all. We've studied these documents. Take that difference from me. My question is, were you yourself ever aware of that discrepancy?
No, I was not.
So let me just try one or two of these on you. If we look at the August 99 North Ayrshire report at BRE 30-35377 and go to page 6 in that, which is the first of the 3 reports I showed you, paragraph 3.1.1 near the foot of the screen, let's keep that on the page and I'll show it to you. Remedial measures. And then halfway down the paragraph, you'll see towards the right-hand side, it says, the spandrel panel to be an external insulated render of panels between the windows of either a non-combustible or Class 0 material. You see that sentence?
I do.
Now, I'm going to ask you to see that and compare it with the report you saw a year later, in August 2000. Can we please have up BRE 30-35375, page 4? And I'd like both of those up at the same time. So I wanted BRE 000-35377, page 6, at the same time as BRE 000-35375, page 4. Can we do that? Have those up at the same time. Yes, thank you very much. Now, I'll just pick up the discrepancy between them and just ask you about it. So on the left-hand side, as I've shown you, under 3.1.1, the sentence ends, between the windows of either a non-combustible or Class 0 material, whereas if you look on the right-hand side, under remedial, we want page 4, on the right-hand side, not page 6, please. Under remedial measures, yes, thank you. You can see in the third line, which is the same, the spandrel panel to be an external insulated render of panels between the windows of a non-combustible material. And That's different from between the windows of either a non-combustible material or Class 0 material. Now, just looking at that discrepancy, you can see the words or Class 0 have been removed after non-combustible, and there's a grammatical consequential change as well, isn't there?
Yes.
Are you able to account for the discrepancy? Why is the report that was sent to you in August 2000 as part of the investigation of Real Fires report different from the BRE report sent to North Ayrshire?
I do not know.
Do you remember any discussion about removing the reference to Class 0 in the version of the report that came to government?
No, I do not.
Looking on, if we can please, we'll keep them both on the screen. Looking at the North Ayrshire report, left-hand side, can we go to page 9? And looking at the final paragraph on page 9, which starts in the case of the fire at Garnet Court, and then flip over to page 10, please. That says, in a hanging second paragraph on that page, although the material used in 1991 should have been Class 0, we have reservations about its current performance. And then you see the words at the end of the next paragraph. We suggest that non-combustible materials are chosen wherever possible. Now, that's in the report that went to North Ayrshire. Compare that, right-hand side, please, with what you see a year later, page 7. If we can go to page 7 on the right-hand side, you can see in the third paragraph down, the same text repeated word for word. You see?
Sorry, which paragraph?
I'm asking you to look at the paragraph 2 above implications for building regulations towards the bottom.
Okay.
And you could see that the long paragraph ends, GRP was the main material involved, and then it goes straight on to the remedial measures. No reference there, or no paragraph between the two, which says, although the material used in 1991 should have been Class 0, we have reservations about its current performance. Okay. Do you know why that was excised from an otherwise very similar, if not identical, report sent to North Ayrshire the year before?
I do not.
And the same question in relation to the last sentence that you can see had been removed. You can see the words, we suggest that non-combustible materials are chosen wherever possible. It does not appear on the right-hand side, the report you saw. Now, I think, again, do I take it that you knew nothing about that discrepancy?
I knew nothing about that.
Do you know when you came to learn about that discrepancy?
By following the inquiry, as I have these past few weeks.
Right. Have you any inkling as to why those amendments, those excisions from the text were made?
I do not. From my perspective, that would be a specific question, of course, to take back to BRE.
Well, we've asked the BRE about that, and they were unable to assist us. Now, looking at this now, does it concern you that the investigation of Real Fires report to you in 2000 is different in these respects from the one sent by the BRE to North Ayrshire on this matter?
Yes. I find it surprising that this would have happened and can't think for a reason why.
Right. You can't think for a reason why.
No.
If it wasn't done at DETR's investigation, have you any inkling as to on whose instigation it was done?
I do not.
Do you know, can you think of any reason why the BRE would consider that the department would not want to be kept informed of their concerns about the reaction to fire performance of Class 0 materials or products?
I do not.
Can I ask you then to look at another section of the 1999 report, left-hand side, page 24 this time, and go to page 24, items 2 and 3. Item 2 says, it is highly unlikely that the material used as cladding for Garnet Court and the 4 sister blocks was Class 0 at the time of the fire, it is also highly likely that the GRP supplied would never have achieved Class 0. Now, take it from me, Mr. Burd, that those 2 conclusions do not appear in the August 2000 report prepared for you by the BRE. Can you think of any reason why the BRE would not set those observations or findings out in the clearest terms to the department in this report?
No, I do not. And if I may, given the importance of the investigation of real fire contracts, it is imperative that we should be receiving the fullest information about the fires that are being investigated.
Now, can I ask you then to look at BRE 303? Well, before I ask you that, these reports are prepared by the BRE and sent to the department.
Yes.
Was anybody else involved, to your knowledge, in the decision-making process about what those reports should contain, other than the BRE or possibly the department?
No.
So can we safely conclude that whoever made the decision to excise those passages from the North Ayrshire report that I've shown you and send you the version without those matters excised were either people in the BRE or people in government? There can't have been anybody else.
Given that is who the documents went to, yes.
But you can't, sitting there now, even offer any kind of explanation,
No.
however speculative.
No, but the point I would add, though, that we didn't receive these documents digitally. At this stage, they were probably still coming forward as hard copy. So as a client receiving these documents, that would have been typically in hard copy. And I have no answer to why this has happened. As I say, in terms of it going back to the people specifically named on the front covers of the documents to ask that very specific questions.
To the best of your recollection, casting your mind back to the time of the Garnet Court fire, June 1999 and into 2000, was there a particular sensitivity or anxiety about Class 0 as a safe and appropriate classification for the external walls of a high-rise building?
No, not that I can recall.
Right. Let's go to BRE 3035379, please. Now this, well, we need to go to page 22 in this pack of documents. I should just tell you what it is. It's a pack of documents provided to the inquiry by the BRE as a copy of their file on Garnock. So that's what this is. And if we go to page 22, you can see, looking at it, it's addressed to Tony. Do you know who that is, or that might be?
So potentially 2 people. If it's come from the BRE, it might have been a gentleman called Tony Morris,
Right.
I believe worked there. The fact it's from the BRE, as I said, I don't think this could be the case, but the principal fire safety professional to whom I worked for at the department was Tony Edwards.
Right. Well, let's see if we can get a little bit further into it. If you look through this, it's difficult to interpolate, but it says a material alteration still need limited comb on or over curtain wall is Class 0. Combustible barriers looked 135, every other floor. BRE report, I think that is PVL L doc, avoiding risk something in submission to committee.
Right.
Or maybe risk question in submission to committee. Now, obviously, this is my reading this document, doing the best I can with it. First, have you ever seen this before?
I have not.
Were you ever privy to a conversation along the lines suggested by this note? Difficult, though I know it is to interpret.
I was not.
Did you suggest, or were you aware of any suggestion emanating from the department that the BRE's report on Garnet Court was to be prepared as a privileged legal document in order to avoid it being quotable in the Select Committee inquiry?
No, I was not.
Let's go to BRE 3035378, please. This is an email chain. If we go to page 25 in this run, this is an email chain from September 1999. Now, we don't need to go to the whole thing, but if we go to page 26, you can see at the bottom there is an email from somebody called Colleen Wade in New Zealand, as you can see, to IAFSS Newcastle and SFPE Newcastle, which gets forwarded on by Martin Shipp to Penny Morgan. So it seems to go into BRE. And it looks as if the two Newcastle entities there are part of the University of Newcastle. Mm-hmm. That's my guesswork. And it says this: in a recent fire and flammability bulletin, reference was made to a fire in a 13-storey block of flats in Irvine, Ayrshire, in June of this year. The fire apparently spread externally up the block via overcladding, engulfing the upper 9 floors in minutes. Does anyone know where or from whom I could get some more information about this incident? And if we then look at Peter Field's response to Brian Martin, if we go to the top of page 25, following the screen from bottom to top, we can see the course of this email. It goes to Penny Morgan. From Penny Morgan, it goes to Brian Martin, and she asks him, how much can we tell them, P? And then Brian Martin to you, Ant. Can you see that in the middle of your screen? And have you put out any press releases? Can we assume that anything said at the Select Committee hearing is in the public domain? Regards, Brian. Mm-hmm. And further up the chain, there's an email from Peter Field, he's at the BRE, 23rd of September 1999, to Brian Martin and you, copied to Penny Morgan. Brian, I discussed this with Anthony yesterday following inquiries from radio. Our position is to refer all matters to DETR where it is appropriate to do so, i.e. if they are seeking to put the issue into a regulatory context. And then in capital letters it says, we should not comment. All inquiries we receive must be referred to Tom Harvey, BRE Press. He has been adequately briefed. As ever, let me know of any approaches, please. Peter. Now, Peter Field, as I say, BRE. Yep. You and Brian Martin are government. Had you instructed the BRE not to comment on the fire?
Not that I can recall, but no, I would not have instructed the BRE not to comment on the fire. I would have suggested that where there are questions in relation to government matters, that they should refer the matter to DETR, so for us to deal with, looking at this email.
Right, I see.
Yeah.
And why was that?
Typically, we wouldn't want BRE commenting upon building regulations matters or similar if it could be more readily directed to press officers within DETR.
Right. Now, at this time, you'll note that the Select Committee was still sitting, in the sense that it had heard evidence in the July of 1999 and didn't report until the December of 1999. Did that have a bearing on what you were telling Peter Field, and he then relayed to Brian Martin?
No, it would have been. There have been many situations whereby press are asking questions potentially in relation to a building regs issue, and where best we'd suggest hand it over in terms of to the DETR, to the press officer, for the department to answer.
Right. Let's then turn to the Select Committee. You, I think, attended the Select Committee inquiry on the 20th of July 1999. Is that right?
I did.
And you didn't give evidence?
No, I joined the Minister, Paul Everall, Head of Building Regulations, Tony Edwards, Principal Fire Safety Professional, and I also attended, but I did not give evidence.
No. Now let's look at the minutes of the Select Committee. CLG 3019484. That is the minutes of evidence and appendices of the Tuesday, the 20th of July 1999, and you can see who was there. There's the FBU, and then Fire Safety Development Group, David Harper and Dr. Bob Moore. And then from the BRE, or as it was called, the Building Research Establishment Fire Research Station, Peter Field, Tony Morris and Sarah Colwell, and then others were represented as well, including CWCT, Dr. Stephen Ledbetter, and from the department, as you can see, Nick Rainsford, Paul Everall, Tony Edwards, and you, Mr. Burd.
Yes.
Yes. So is it right that you would have heard, or did hear, the evidence given by David Harper and Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Can we then go to CLG 3019484 and go to page 9? And at page 9, this is the memorandum by the Fire Safety Development Group, whose members you've just seen, at least so far as the Select Committee was concerned. Is this a document you think you read at the time?
Yes.
Yes. So would it have been a document you would have been familiar with yourself?
I would have read the document once it had been made available.
Right.
Yes.
And what about those others from the DETR, Tony Edwards and Nick Rainsford?
I would suggest, well, Mr. Rainsford as a minister, I would envisage, given his appearance, he probably would have read it. Tony Edwards would definitively have read it because he was in charge of the fire safety aspects of the building regulations. Paul Everall as well.
Right. Now, if we look at paragraph 2, this has a title, Memoranda, and then 2, whether a risk is posed by such cladding. And then if you look at 2.2, it says this: we believe there is confusion about the Class 0 standard for 2 reasons. Class 0 materials refer to the performance of the surface of the material, but applies to the total product, i.e. the facing plus any coating, adhesive, paint, etc., plus the substrate to which the facing is bonded. Clearly, these other elements will affect the performance of the cladding in a fire and will vary with the nature of the coating, the thickness of the adhesive, the type of substrate, etc. Just pausing there, on the basis of your knowledge, experience and expertise at the time, did you agree with that assessment?
No,
You didn't?
not necessarily in terms of the confusion existing. It was my understanding, having been formerly a building control officer as well, that there was understanding that actually the application of what Class 0 equated to, and therefore what it might mean thereafter as to what performance might continue subject to the substrate that sat beneath that.
Leaving aside the first sentence and taking the second sentence on, it's right, isn't it, that Class 0 materials refers to the performance of the surface of the material but applies to the total product?
Yes, I agree with
Right.
that sentence.
Okay. So your disagreement is about the extent or existence of confusion rather than the analysis of the
Yes.
makeup of Class 0?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Then looking at 2.3, a material of limited combustibility can achieve a Class 0 rating as defined by the regulations, but a Class 0 material is not equivalent, and that's got an italic, not equivalent to a material of limited combustibility. A material of limited combustibility is generally a material which is totally non-combustible or which contains a small amount of combustible material. Combustible materials like plastic, wood, etc. are not, in italics, materials of limited combustibility, but can achieve Class 0 performance by adding fire retardant chemicals or facing the combustible material with a metal foil or sheet. Thus, there is a fundamental difference between products that are inherently Class 0 and products modified to enhance their performance. This serves to undermine the integrity of the regulations and therefore reduces fire safety. Now, leaving aside the opinions in the last sentence there, do you agree with the rest of paragraph 2.3?
Could we maybe take it bit by bit to make sure?
Yes.
Yes. So I agree that Class 0 material is not equivalent to a material of limited combustibility.
Yes.
It's generally a material. A material of limited combustibility is generally a material which is totally non-combustible or which contains a small amount of combustible material.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes?
Combustible materials like plastic or wood are not materials of limited combustibility but can achieve Class 0 performance by adding fire retardant. Yes, I agree with that.
Yes?
Thus, there is a fundamental difference between products that are inherently Class 0 and products modified to enhance. I agree there is a difference.
Yes? And do you agree with the last sentence? This serves to undermine the integrity of the regulations and therefore reduces fire safety.
No, I do not,
Why is that?
because there are situations whereby there are provisions within the regulation, within the statutory guidance, that for the purposes of the external surface, it would achieve, you'd want a performance of Class 0, but you might ask for additional levels of performance, such as limited combustibility in certain situations.
Right, I see. Well, we'll come back to that possibility later. If we go, please, 2 pages ahead in this document to page 11, we can see paragraph 5.3. And at 5.3, towards the top of the screen, it says this: there is also widespread concern amongst many firefighters about the safety of external cladding systems consisting of metal-faced foam plastics. These systems will generally have Class 0 fire performance, but in real fires, the foam plastic lining can ignite and burn. This helps to spread the fire via the building fabric, and there will be an increase in the generation of smoke and toxic fumes. Collapse is also possible. We believe this subject is still being reviewed by the DETR and consider more stringent controls a priority. Now, Peter Field also gave evidence, and if we can go to page 19, paragraph 46 in this document, he says, and this is in the live evidence, and it's quite a long passage, but let me just show it to you. He says, about 2/3 of the way down, I think there are some circumstances. You see that?
I do.
I think there are some circumstances whereby utilising that of itself, that's Class 0, would not adequately identify the fire performance of the complete system. Now, taking the 2 passages I've just shown you without asking a question on so far, did you regard the evidence of the Fire Safety Group and Peter Field of the BRE here as clear?
Mr. Millett, could I ask, could we go back a bit? Because I was looking at the larger document that then honed in, so I've lost my place on.
I'm so sorry. Yes, of course. Does that help? This is under examination of witnesses, and this was evidence.
Yeah. And so remind me again, please, sir, where we're looking.
Bottom right-hand corner of the page.
Thank you.
And I think the context of this is Mr. Field, Peter Field of the BRE, telling the panel what he thought. And I'll just run up to it again. Halfway down that paragraph, he says, there have also been issues referred to already relating to the Class 0 system of fire spread, which is basically a material-based system of classification. I think there are some circumstances whereby utilising that of itself would not adequately identify the fire performance of a complete system. Now, was that evidence clear when you heard it?
Yes.
Yes. And similarly, the passage I read to you on page 11, widespread concern amongst many firefighters, was that clear?
It was clear, and from my experience, concern had been raised by firefighters.
Thank you. Now, can you recall, was there any view put forward to the Select Committee to counter what is said in those 2 passages, namely, along the lines of evidence or submission to say, no, Class 0 is a reliable and a robust classification for reaction to fire on the external surface of a high-rise building?
I cannot recall.
No. Now, what at the time was your understanding of Class 0?
So from my perspective, Class 0 was utilised in relation to the external surface of a material, and therefore, by virtue of what it was looking to do was, by virtue of 2 tests, it was looking to control potential fire spread and the amount of heat given off by the material in a fire condition. but it was testing the surface, and it was the highest national classification for the performance of such materials.
Now, you say it was testing the surface. I don't necessarily need to take you to it, but does that reflect what became paragraph 13 of Appendix A of Approved Document B, which was the definition?
Yes.
Yes. And that definition, I think, said, and I'm summarising, that the material or the surface of a composite product should be composed throughout, should be either of limited combustibility or else composed throughout Class 1 with relevant indices. Yes. And that was always the case, wasn't it, from 1992 at least, even before that, so far as you were aware?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Yes. Now, you would also have been aware, and I'm making that assumption given your expertise, that Class 0 was a product performance or material performance classification for lining materials.
Yes.
Do you understand, or was there ever a time when you did understand, how it came about that a test for lining materials was thought suitable for the classification of the fire reaction performance of the surface of an external wall of a high-rise building?
From recollection, it has been utilised for quite some time, long before I arrived at the department. But I suppose the most sort of relevant point is there was no other tests to utilise. And so it was, in terms of for the surface, it was used for that purposes, and therefore has been used in a number of the approved documents.
Right. So it was your understanding that a test for internal linings was transposed to an application for the external surfaces of walls simply because there was no other test available?
That, in terms of the surface, is my understanding. Where additional provisions of performance might be needed in terms of the substrate or insulation, then they could also be set to. But yeah, that was my understanding for external surface.
Right. Do you know the logic? It sounds from your answer that the logic here was the BS 476 Part 6 and 7 tests, and there was no other test, so those would do.
Not those would do. Forgive me, I can't, in terms of the work that was done to show the performance from an internal lining to an external surface, and when it was first utilised, but it was felt that whilst the reference scenario is indeed an internal lining of a room, obviously that you would be able to get an element of performance that would still meet your need for external surfaces.
Do you remember at any time in your career within government whether you heard any concerns expressed about whether it was appropriate to use a test developed for internal linings as a test and classification standard for the external surface of external walls on high-rise buildings? I
believe there had been suggestions by some that actually it might not be the most befitting test to utilise, and hence as a regulator, therefore we, as I was then, we were very then mindful that how we might need to supplement that in certain situations, such as asking for level sort of periods of limited combustibility in addition to that surface spread of flame rating.
Right. So you say there had been suggestions by some that it actually might not be the most befitting test to utilise. Now, those suggestions, first, do you know when those suggestions were made?
They were made from time to time by people, but generally on the whole, whilst thought not ideal, we were mindful that there were new tests coming down the track in terms of European test methods and similar, but it was felt that for the purpose of regulations that they would be sufficient, and when needed you would add additional items of performance to that specification.
And who were the people who made those suggestions from time to time?
Some parts of academia would raise it. and some other academia, and some other fire safety experts.
Can you give us any names or any organisations?
Sorry.
The BRE? The BRE ever say that they had doubts about the safety of Class 0, given that it had been derived from an internal linings test?
BRE would certainly have suggested that there are other more tests that were under development that would be more befitting in terms of as they come forward in the European context. So, yeah.
We can come to that material in due course. Did you understand that there was a difference between Class 0 and limited combustibility?
Yes.
Yes. And did you understand, and I detect that you did, but help me, that although Class 0 would be achieved if a material or surface of a material of a composite product was composed throughout of material of limited combustibility, the same was not true vice versa?
Yes.
Yes. In other words, the material was not of limited combustibility merely because it or the product achieved Class 0.
Yes.
Right. And that was crystal clear, was it?
Yes.
Yes. And you were aware, I think, weren't you, that a Class 0 could be achieved within the definition and its use in what became 12.6 and diagram 40 as an alternative to material of limited combustibility by passing or achieving the relevant indices in the BS 476 Part 6 and 7 tests.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, turning first to Part 7, that's the surface spread of flame test, isn't it?
That's
Wasn't
my
it?
understanding, yes.
Were you aware that the reference scenario for that test was an internal fire?
Yes.
I mean, it had originated as a method for testing flame spread within corridors.
Yes.
Yes, and on BS 476 Part 6, the fire propagation test, that was also developed to test a fire within a compartment.
Yes.
Yes. So both of those tests have internal fires as reference scenarios, not an external cladding fire.
Yes.
In the light of that, what is the relevance, or what was the relevance of either of those tests, or taken together Class 0, to assessing the risk of external fire spread in the event of a cladding fire?
As I explained, in terms of whilst they are very much material tests for internal arrangements, it was felt that they could be utilised to even to set performance for external facades and similar in support of the building regulations. However, as I've touched upon already, where needed, we could supplement those provisions with others in terms of maybe a request for materials of limited combustibility. But from our understanding and my understanding at the time, they were usable and could be utilised as part of the building regulations statutory guidance.
Now, when you say we could supplement those provisions with others in terms of maybe a request for materials of limited combustibility, what do you mean by reference to the building regulations at least until 2006? ADB, at least until 2006.
So what you could up to and included in 2000.
Well, up to before 2006.
Before 2000.
Before the amendments in 2006.
Yes. From recollection, within section 13 of the document, that would be asking at the time for thermal insulation in ventilated cavities should be of material of limited combustibility.
Yes. So that's what you're referring to, is it?
Yes.
I see.
Yes. Sorry.
Did you ever come to doubt at any time before the Grenfell Tower fire in June 2017 whether Class 0 had at any time been an appropriate classification for external cladding material or products?
In my experience, no.
Did you ever learn from Debbie Smith that her opinion of Class 0 was that it was based as it was, on small-scale tests which were not appropriate or reliable indicators of how a cladding system might perform in a fire?
We'd had discussions in terms of, I think with the backdrop in relation to the European test methodologies that were being developed at that time, that they might ultimately, I'd had discussions with Debbie where she had raised that perhaps a move to differing tests would be of benefit in the future.
Yes, that's not quite an answer to my question. It's a bit more general than that. Did you ever learn from her that her view of Class Naught, in general, was that they were based on small-scale tests and as such were an inappropriate and unreliable indicator of how a cladding system might perform in a fire? That was her view of Class Naught. Did you know that?
I can't recall, but we must have had discussions, from recollection, about a move ultimately to the new European test methodologies.
Right. So we have a time frame for that, the harmonisation process, which I think started with the Radar 2 report on reaction to fire in May 2000. Was it about that time that you had these discussions with Debbie in general about the appropriateness of Class Naught? Was it in that context?
No, I don't believe it was. The radar work was something that we undertook because we had to bring about recognition of the new European test methodologies and how we would place them into the approved documents and how they would transpose into the approved documents. Whether we had discussions at that time, Debbie and I, about cladding, I don't think that would have been the case. I think we'd have been focused in on the transposition between the national approach for surfaces and the new Euro class. Yeah.
So the discussions about Dr. Smith's views about Class Naught would have been, earlier than the harmonisation programme?
I can't recall.
All right. I'd like now to look, please, at some of the recommendations made by the Select Committee in their report after the evidence had been delivered. Can we go, please, to CLG 30194778? This is the report dated the 14th of December 1999, entitled Potential Risk of Fire Spread in Buildings via External Cladding Systems. And if we can go to it, please, page 9, paragraph 20, I'd like to examine with you, Mr. Burd, the recommendation under the heading, the adequacy of the regulations pertaining to their use, which is just about a quarter of the way down your screen. And it says this, and I'll read the bold as well, and note the bold, which I think is the recommendation. Notwithstanding Notwithstanding what we have said in paragraph 18 above, we do not believe that it should take a serious fire in which many people are killed before all reasonable steps are taken towards minimising the risks. The evidence we have received strongly suggests that small-scale tests which are currently used to determine the fire safety of external cladding systems are not fully effective in evaluating their performance in a live fire situation. As a more appropriate test for external cladding systems now exists, we see no reason why it should not be used. We believe, it goes on, that all external cladding systems should be required either to be entirely non-combustible or to be proven through full-scale testing not to pose an unacceptable level of risk in terms of fire spread. And then bold, we therefore recommend that compliance with the standards set in the test for assessing the fire performance of external cladding systems, which has been submitted to the British Standards Institution for adoption as a British standard, be substituted in approved document B for previous requirements relating to the fire safety of external cladding systems. What did you understand that recommendation there in paragraph 20 to mean?
Could I see the full recommendation?
Yes,
please?
absolutely. If we can go back a page. please, to page 9, foot of page 9. I'm really focusing on 20 in light of
Yep.
19, which I read to you. The recommendation in bold, as you can see in the last two lines there, is there.
Yeah, so that was a recommendation from the Select Committee that either a cladding system should be entirely non-combustible or its performance proven through full-scale testing.
Yes, and if we go over the page to page 10, I just want to draw your attention to the word substituted in the second line there, yes?
Yes?
And looking at that word there, again, what did you understand that recommendation to mean?
That it should be, that should happen and go into the approved document B as a way of showing compliance.
And did you understand it to mean that small-scale testing for Class Naught under BS 476 Part 6 and 7 should be replaced, should be removed and replaced by a full-scale test method?
That was the recommendation made by the Select Committee. That's
And you were never in any doubt about that, were you?
No, not as the recommendation made by the committee, no.
No. And if we go down the page here to paragraph 22, you can see that the committee recommended that the department, picking it up in the bold, instruct local authorities and registered social landlords to undertake a review of their existing building stock with a view to ascertaining how many multi-storey buildings are currently using external cladding systems and how many cladding systems are in use, which, whilst complying with the regulations in force at the time when they were installed, do not comply with current regulations. See that?
Yes.
Did that review ever take place?
I can't recall.
No. I mean, we have seen no evidence of any such review unless it's a survey done ahead of the CC 1924 tests. But just looking at the terms of that recommendation there, you can't recall.
No.
Is that you've never seen one, you don't know anything about it?
I can't recall.
Right. I mean, sorry, just to be clear, often witnesses say, I can't recall when they can't remember one way or the other. But are you saying you, from your recollection, are saying that it never took place?
No, I'm not saying that, sir. I'm trying to think back. There was a formal response from the department, from the Minister, Nick Rainsford.
We're going to come to that in a moment.
Oh, okay.
But just in general terms, I mean, if there were a review as recommended, you, given the systems in place at the time, would have been very likely to have known about it.
Yes, it
Yes.
wouldn't have been undertaken by perhaps the Building Regulations Division, as it was known at the time. That would have been undertaken by somebody else. But I don't recall this.
No. And
This
we've
review.
seen no evidence of it.
Okay.
Now, can we then turn to the government's response, please, to the committee's recommendation? That is at CLG. Mr. Chairman, I just note the time. I'm happy to carry on, given that we started with this witness.
Shall we finish this point?
Yes, let's
Okay.
do that. Well, yes, let's do that. Is a CLG 140347. Now, this is a document we believe which is dated the 6th of April 2000. And we understand it to have been sent by Nick Rainsford, the then minister. Just looking at it, it says, Appendix, Government Response to the First Report of the Environment, Transport and Regional Affairs Committee on Potential Risk of Fire Spread in Buildings via External Cladding Systems. Would that be right?
Yes.
Yes. Now, it's undated, as I say, but you can see from paragraph 1 at the very least that it post-dates 15th of March 2000. Did you have a role in preparing this draft?
I don't believe so. Well, no. It would have been prepared by Tony Edwards, the Principal Fire Safety Professional, working with Caroline Cousin, who was the Head of Technical Policy then. I might have been shown and asked to offer comment on the document, but I didn't write it myself.
I see. Now let's scroll down to paragraph 9 on page 3, please. Page 3, paragraph 9. It says there, the 1992 edition of the approved document to Part B, which was in force at the time I gave evidence to the committee last year, sets out the recommended provisions for the fire protection of external surfaces of walls in diagrammatic form. However, in the new 2000 edition of the approved document to Part B, the test method mentioned in your recommendation, currently BRE Fire Note 9, is now quoted as an alternative to meeting these provisions for the external surfaces of walls. Now, that's the department's response to the recommendation we've looked at together, Mr. Burd. In other words, that the full-scale test should be substituted in place of the previous requirements, including Class 0.
Mm-hmm.
Now here, paragraph 9 explains that Fire Note 9 would be referred to in the 2000 edition of approved document B, yes?
Yes.
As an alternative to meeting these provisions. Now, that wasn't the recommendation of the Select Committee, was it? They'd recommended that Class 0 be replaced by the full system test.
I believe that was their recommendation, yes.
Not that Class 0 be retained to sit alongside a full-scale test as an alternative route to compliance.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Do you know what the reason was that the Minister had for ignoring the Select Committee's recommendation or refusing to follow it?
No, I do not. However, when I joined the department in 1998, we had just closed on the consultation that amounted to the 2000 edition of the ADB. So the Building Regulations Advisory Committee would have asked a working group to be formed, and so potentially there was some discussion within that BRAC working group as to where such a reference could go in relation to Fire Note 9. But as to why it went only in part, in effect, as an alternative to what is now diagram 40, I can't recall why it was done in that way.
Right. Do you know who made the decision to ignore or refuse to follow the Select Committee's recommendations?
Ultimately, the responsibility resides with ministers.
Well, that's certainly true, but ministers act on advice. Do you know who ultimately gave the advice that the Select Committee's recommendation should not be followed?
So that would have been Tony Edwards, I would suggest, who was the principal fire safety professional.
Right. And what was the rationale for that advice, retaining Class 0 to sit alongside the new full-scale test, in light of the Select Committee's conclusions and recommendations based on the evidence that it had received?
That's not something I can answer, and nor something that I'm aware of as
Right.
to why it was placed there.
You can't help.
No, I cannot.
Now, you gave a hint of a possible answer, and clearly that may be an ex post facto after the event, as it were, rationalisation to do with the closing of the agreement to amend ADB.
Right.
Now, ADB was amended and a new version came out in July 2000.
Yes.
That's some months after this,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it? Is there any reason, given that ADB was, as revised, in production, why the recommendations of the Select Committee could not be carried into effect in those revisions?
I can only assume that there wasn't necessarily agreement that it should go in as the only way of showing compliance.
If we go down to paragraph 11, you can see...
Can I just ask, would it be right to understand that the Minister would have been presented with a written submission advising him not only what to do, but why to do it?
That would be my understanding, yes, sir.
Thank you.
And that probably would have come from the head of technical policy, Caroline Cousin.
Right. Thank you very much.
Looking at paragraph 11, when the technical amendments to the document have been completed and it has been adopted as a British standard, the Department will amend the reference in the approved document to BRE Fire Note 9 to reflect its status as a British standard. We will also review whether the reference to this method of demonstrating compliance should be strengthened. It is unlikely that any such changes will be made immediately. The status of the test method is changed. As such, minor amendments to the approved documents are difficult to promulgate to ensure that all users of the document are made aware of the change. change. However, supplements to the approved document are planned to give guidance on the new harmonised European methods of test, and the amendment would be included in this. Now, no amendments to strengthen the reference to what became BS 8414 was included in the 2006 edition of approved document B, published in April 2007, was it?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, no amendment to strengthen the reference to BS 8414 was included in the 2006 edition of approved document B.
It was, the provision was recognised that it isn't just an alternative to surface spread of flame. When the reference to 8414 Part 1 and Part 2 and BR 135 went into what was the 2006 edition, it was there as an alternative to undertaking the provisions set out in in section 12
Yes.
for surfaces and provisions in relation to the external wall.
Yes.
Yes.
That is, if I may say so, entirely correct.
Yes.
And therefore, I think you would agree with me that in the amendments made in 2002 to reflect Euro, 2006, 2010, 2013, throughout all of those amendments, Fire Note 9 and becoming BS 8414, Parts 1 and latterly Part 2 from 2006 were provided as an alternative route to compliance with the approved documents, alternative to Section 6, 12.6 and Diagram 40
Yes.
and 12.7.
But forgive me, the Select Committee's recommendation did talk about making potentially there are two approaches. It should be made entirely of non-combustible material, or it should be a full-scale test. I believe what is called here is the linear route does exist within the approved document B, and then the citation of 8414 did go in.
As an alternative.
As an alternative.
That's my point.
Yes.
There was never a substitution, only an alternative.
Yes. The only point I would add is that, as alluded in this response from government to the Select Committee, that there would be a review undertaken as an appropriate point to see if that provision be strengthened, and by virtue of considerations of the Statutory Committee, the Building Regulations Advisory Committee and the Working Party, the proposals for amendments of the various iterations to which you refer, those would have been considered during that process.
Right. What did you understand by reference to this method of demonstrating compliance should be strengthened?
I understood that to mean if they were going to make that definitively the method of showing compliance.
I see. Why, to the best of your knowledge at the time, was it necessary to review whether the reference to that method of demonstrating compliance should become the method of demonstrating the compliance, as you've just explained, in light of the clear recommendation of the Select Committee that should have been so?
As I say, this is a response from the government. It is a recommendation by a Select Committee, which is obviously held with huge importance, but it was still a recommendation, and therefore it was for government to consider what it should do in relation to this matter.
Would that be a good point, Mr. Millett?
One or two more questions, and it would be a very good point. Was there a conscious decision to retain the provisions of Diagram 40, Class 0 and Diagram 40, in approved document B at this time?
By virtue of it still remaining, then yes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it is now a convenient moment. Right. Thank you.
Well, as you were told, Mr. Burd, we have a break during the afternoon, and so we'll take it now. We'll stop now. We'll resume, please, at 3:45. And now you've started giving your evidence, I have to ask you, please, on this and other occasions not to talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
Thank you, sir.
All right? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Millett. 3:45, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Would you ask Mr. Burd to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Burd?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr.
Yes,
Burd.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Burd, I just want to show you the ministerial submission to which the Chairman referred earlier before the break. Can we please go to CLG 30194557 and look at the first page there, which is the response CLG 30194557. Which is the response from Caroline Cousin, Head of Technical Policy, 9th of March 2000, to Paul Everall and Nick Rainsford. And this is Mr. Rainsford's copy, ticked by him, as you can see, on the 9th of March itself. And it's entitled...
Sorry, Mr. Millett. It's been ticked by... That's Paul Everall.
Oh, it's Paul Everall, is it?
Yes.
PE, quite right. OK.
Yes.
Good, fair point. And if you look down at this document, please, and go to page 2, paragraph 7... it says, the third point is that the BRE large-scale test for the fire performance of external cladding systems should be substituted in the approved document Part B as a requirement for the safety of cladding systems. The response explains that the approved documents do not make requirements but just offer guidance. However, it goes on to say that the 2000 edition of the approved document has been expanded to include a reference to this test. It also details the progress which has been made with the adoption of this method as a British standard. Now, we have, beyond that paragraph, scoured this document for the advice given, or any advice given by Ms. Cousin to the Minister to ignore the Select Committee's recommendation to substitute Class 0, etc., with the full-scale test. And we can't see it. This is the closest we get. And there's nothing there, as you can see, about not following the Select Committee's guidance. So are you able to offer any insight as to why that advice was rejected, or that recommendation was rejected?
I am not, sir.
Right. Is it possible that somebody perhaps above your pay grade, as it were, would have spoken to the Minister outside the formal ministerial submission in closing this advice, which is this, and persuaded him to do what he appears to have decided to do in the April 2000 document?
It was not uncommon for detailed and important submissions like this for ministers to request a follow-up discussion with officials to talk items through. I don't know if that happened or not, but that was quite common for that to happen in the department.
Right. Now, let's think about who was there at the time. We know you were, and Tony Edwards was at the Select Committee. Did Tony Edwards have the same technical experience and expertise that you had in matters of fire and the building regulations relating to fire?
Well, he was the principal fire safety professional, and he was more experienced than me, having worked within the industry. So I'd suggest that yes, he was
right.
He was better than I.
Well, that's modest of you. And what I'm really seeking to get at is whether you can think of any reason why any discussions of the kind that you've described, which might have taken place between officials and the Minister after Caroline Cousin's formal ministerial submission, would not have involved you.
Again, I was deputy to the fire safety portfolio, Part B. I can't recall attending such a meeting.
No.
As I say, ministers, certainly something as important as this, Mr. Rainford would potentially want to talk through what he was going to submit in writing. From recollection, Mr. Everall enjoyed a good relationship with ministers, and might have gone in his capacity, Caroline and Tony, but I can't recall attending.
Would it have been uncommon or unusual, perhaps, for you not to have attended those meetings, given your involvement in the Select Committee evidence?
No, it could have been a matter of circumstance in terms of my availability. I might have been out of the country on business. These things did happen. I was the junior on fire safety. They wouldn't hold a meeting back with the minister because I wasn't available.
I see.
Yeah.
Now, can we just go back then to Nick Rainsford's document at CLG 140347 and just pick it up at paragraph 6. And you can see there that there's a reference to a large series of large-scale fire tests, 3/4 of the way down the paragraph, to assess the fire performance of a range of existing and new cladding systems. The results of this work will be used to determine the most appropriate method for specifying the fire performance requirements of cladding systems. The revised guidance should be available by September 2001. Yes?
Yes.
That turned into, didn't it, contract CC 1924?
Yes.
Yes. Let's now turn to that. And let's start with the bid document, BRE 3041836. And there it is. We've been through this with a number of witnesses. You can see that the project manager was Mrs. S. Colwell. Project titled Review of Fire Performance of External Cladding Systems and Revision of BRE Report BR135. And the date of it is the 23rd of December 1999. Now that's only a week after the Select Committee report on the 14th of December 1999, isn't it?
Yes.
So request for bids would have gone out before that, one imagines. Is that right?
I would have thought so, yes.
Right. Now, if we go to page 3 of the bid document, we may not need to run through all of these, but the project objectives are set out there. Looking at the primary project objectives, you can see 3 bullet points. Review the guidance contained in the approved documents, update and maintain the building regulations, and support the process of regulation and harmonisation with Europe, yes?
Yes.
And under those 3 objectives on page 3 and over to page 4, there are some specific objectives on the department's part. Mm-hmm. And there's a longish set of bullet points there, yes?
Yes.
Are you familiar with those, or should I take you through them in detail? Let me summarise them if you go back to the bottom of page 3. The first is to carry out a survey of the existing multi-storey building stock in Great Britain in order to determine the composition and design of systems and the changing nature of materials currently in use within 3 months of the start date. The second is to review and update the existing guidance in BR135. Sorry, the second is the database. The third is to review and update the existing guidance in BR135.
Yes.
And then over the page, to complete an experimental programme enabling the assessment of the fire performance of the range of both existing and new cladding systems within 12 months of the start date. The next one is to utilise the large-scale scenario-based test to determine the most appropriate method for specifying the fire performance requirements of cladding systems. And there are others as well, which I don't think I need to take you through. Now, these are the DETR's objectives. Do you agree that they reflected the department's aims?
From recollection, yes.
Yes. And did all of those objectives remain in place and unchanged throughout the life of the project, the CC 1924 project?
I believe so. From recollection, there were some changes along the way with regards to the testing programme in terms of what more might need to be tested. So I can recollect. Well, actually, I might have seen in evidence that's come forward.
Yes. There's some emails from Sarah Colwell in August 2001 about the changes to the testing regime. But the objectives themselves.
Broadly, yes.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Colwell told the inquiry that in her oral evidence that the objective of the project was to review and provide information, but not to rewrite the ADB. Was that your understanding?
Yes, that was my understanding.
If we go to BRE 401392, this is an annual progress report prepared for you, dated the 27th of April 2001, and it was prepared by Sarah Colwell for you. If we go to page 5, we see under the heading Formation of the IAG, it says this: 30 groups were invited to join the industry advisory group for this project. They included representatives from manufacturers, range screen systems, rendered systems and built-up systems, specifiers, and building owners and users. Yes?
Yes.
And under that list, you can see that it is reported that 27 representatives accepted invitations to join the group. Their details are given in Table 1. If we go to page 9, we can see who they are. Page 9, Table 1 is there, members of the IAG, and you can see that your name appears right at the top of the list for the department, yes?
Yes.
And you can see others there, some from government, but mainly from industry organisations, county councils and industry representatives, as well as doctors Smith and Colwell from the BRE. Who had decided which manufacturers, specifiers and building owners and users would be invited to join the IAG?
Sorry, did you say manufacturers?
I
can see trade associations, sir. I don't see individual manufacturers necessarily.
all right. Amending my question then, who had decided on this list?
So the way IAG normally works is that there would come forward a recommendation by those undertaking the work, in this case BRE, and offering a list to me as the client. I would have considered that list and would have suggested if we needed anybody in addition to that for the IAG. What then happens moving forward is that typically at the first meeting of the IAG, there would be a discussion quite early on the agenda items to see if we had missed anybody off of that list, thinking about who would best serve the membership and the work underway.
And on what basis were these representatives chosen?
From recollection, we wanted, of course, to cover the relevant regulators. So there was myself for England and Wales, the relevant regulator from Scotland, the relevant regulator for the Home Office, a selection of consultants, some of the representative from the enforcing authority, which is from the Institute of Building Control, a number of local authorities, and then just looking through the list, a selection, well, more than actually probably the relevant trade associations that existed in the cladding sector.
And what was to be the function of the IAG?
Typically, the IAG is there to provide support and input to the work programme. They would offer comments and in terms of their understanding of the marketplace. They would also typically be shown things like the testing programme to see that if they feel that that was the correct tests to undertake. So it's generally a very open discussion to be had, and actually for them to provide insight and steer the work.
Now, to meet the objectives which we looked at in the document, there were several reports produced for the project, weren't there? One of which was a literature review.
Yes.
Let's look at that. BRE 401353, and this is entitled, and I think we need to go to page 2 for it. It's entitled Fire Spread in External Cladding.
Right, yes.
A literature review. That's not it. That is not it.
It's a costed document.
That is yes. Right. I think we need to go a little bit further down in the document. Forgive me. We go to page 4, and that's where we see it. Forgive me. If you look at page 4, you can see it was prepared by Sarah Colwell, Jason Foster and Brian Martin on a date of the 30th of March for the department, yes?
Yes.
And that would have been you in the first instance, would it?
Tony Edwards was still in the department at this time. He didn't leave till the summer of 2000.
Yes, but you would have been on the receiving end of this document, would you?
Yes.
Yes. Did you ask for it? Or did the department actually ask for it, or did it come?
It's not normal for contractors just to issue.
No. So, exactly. So this was part of the contract. Can we go to page 14, first paragraph there? We can see there that in the first paragraph it says, irrespective of boundary distance, diagram 40, provisions for external surfaces of walls in ADB, restricts the combustibility of external walls of high buildings where the top floor is at least 18 metres above ground level, and those of the assembly and recreation purpose group, to reduce the danger from fire spread up the external face of the building. Now, first, building up a little bit, did you receive this report at the time?
I can't recall, but I would imagine I did.
Yes, and imagining that you did, can we imagine also that you read it?
Yes.
Yes. And this paragraph too, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Now, where it says diagram 40 restricts the combustibility of external walls of high buildings, that is not correct, is it? That is not a correct statement in two respects, is it?
Given that diagram 40 talks about the surface of a cladding system, I can see why that terminology shouldn't have been used. However, the likes of BS 476 Part 6 and Part 7, whilst they are a reaction to fire test, the performance gleaned from those two tests is an aspect of combustibility. But no, I don't think that is quite correct.
No. And it's incorrect, let me suggest to you, in two respects. First, diagram 40 is only relevant to combustibility in that class 0 as one of its possible routes to achievement rests on limited combustibility. Yes. And secondly, diagram 40 does not restrict the combustibility of the entirety of the external wall, but only its surface.
I agree. Yes.
Now, that confusion or error, was that identified by the department at the time?
Not that I can recall,
Right.
no.
And it's quite a fundamental mistake, isn't it, looking at it now?
It is a basic mistake to make, yes. And it doesn't actually capture the rest of the content in what was section 13 of the approved document B then. So,
Right.
yes, it is a mistake, yes.
Presumably you didn't notice at the time how, or ask how it could have come about that an organisation as august in fire as the BRE could have made such a basic error.
I don't recall I raised it.
No.
No.
Turning back to the literature review on page 12, if you can, please. There's a heading, Facade Costs. Now, under that, you'll see that Finnegan highlights the typical cost associated with different cladding systems based on figures given in the Architects' Journal in February 1998 in tables 1, 2 and 3. And you can see that the tables on page 12 there and over to page 13 list various different types of cladding systems. And if we go to page 13 and look at table 3, types and costs of infill panels as quoted in AJ Feb 1998, the penultimate entry there is this: composite panel of 0.5 millimetres stove lacquered aluminium, 3 millimetres polyethylene core, half a millimetre mill finish aluminium with insulation and vapour barrier bonded to rear face, and then there's a price or cost range. Now, Dr. Colwell confirmed to us in her evidence at day 232, page 42, line 16 to 23, that that was aluminium composite material with a polyethylene core. Were you aware of that?
I was not, and I can't recall being aware I can't recall seeing that, but it is in the report, and so I would have seen the report.
Right.
Yep.
But you don't remember looking at it and seeing the presence there of ACM with a PE
No.
as one of the infill panels quoted in the AJ?
No.
More generally, were you aware before approving this report, or before seeing it perhaps, that ACM panels with a PE core were in use, even commonly in use, in the external wall arrangements of buildings in England and Wales?
No.
You weren't?
No.
Did this not strike you at the time as an unnecessary and unusual item to consider, given the upcoming project, if in fact you thought that this kind of product wasn't in use?
No, but from the perspective of the report and the undertaking of investigations, it was for BRE to come forward and suggest types and costs of infill panels. And so I would have seen it along with everything else listed there as this is what is being experienced in the marketplace.
Right. And therefore, did you take from this that partly perhaps, or perhaps only because BRE had recommended that this kind of product be tested, that this product was in use, perhaps even commonly in use, in the UK construction market?
I would not necessarily have had that thought, but I just, if it was listed here as a costing, I mean, obviously it's taken from the Architect's Journal from the time. It doesn't give any values as to market share or similar, but if this is what was coming forward, then yes, it would be considered. Yeah.
I mean, put it this way, you wouldn't have expected the BRE to have recommended testing to the department on a product which was not in common use or significantly commonly used. It would have been a waste of time and money.
Not necessarily a waste of time and money. Certainly if there are products coming forward which are innovative and new, then if this was the case, which I believe it was, then whether this product or any others that were forming part of what is going to be a testing regime to work out the pass-fail criteria of a new full-scale test, then you would want to test things that, could truly test the test, as it were. So, sometimes you would use products that were not that common, but we wanted to potentially see how they would perform in a full-scale test.
Was it your experience at the time, spring of 2000, that ACM panels with a PE core were new to the market? Was an innovative material?
I can't recall, and I don't believe I had any experience of that type of product.
All right. Did it strike you at the time that there may be a fundamental problem with the statutory guidance which did not restrict the use of polyethylene cored panels at height, provided only that they achieve class 0?
I don't believe I would have had that thought at this time.
Right. Did the BRE ever explain the rationale for selecting this product, the composite panel?
Not that I can recall, no.
Was there any discussion that you can recall, either with the BRE or internally within the department, about this particular cladding product at this stage of the project?
Not that I can recall, no.
Can we go to page 27, and we can see the conclusions of the literature review there. If we can just have those expanded a little bit, please. You can see conclusion 2. the 2000 revision of ADB goes some way to addressing the issues of fire performance of external cladding systems. The review of BR 135 will help to clarify any remaining issues as identified. Now, the requirements for external surfaces in both the 2000 and the 2002 versions of ADB were that the external walls of a building over a certain height should meet the provisions of diagram 40, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And to be clear, in the 1992 version, it was diagram 36, and in the 2000 version, it was 13.5.
Yes.
In both versions of those diagrams, in 1992 and 2000, and indeed 2002, I think, stipulated class 0.
Yes.
Yes. And the only difference was that the height was the height for the requirement, where it was reduced from 20 metres in 1992 to 18 metres in 2000. Is that's right, I think?
From my recollection, yes.
Yeah. Otherwise, they were exactly the same, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, for insulation, the 1992 version of approved document B required insulation in the external wall construction of buildings over 20 metres to be material of limited combustibility, didn't it?
From recollection, yes.
Yes. Well, I know it's difficult to remember,
Yes.
so let me just pin this down with the document so you and others can see it. Can we please have BLA 405482, page 74? And it's 12.7. In a building with a story more than 20 metres above ground level, insulation material used in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility. See Appendix A. Yes?
Yes.
Now, let's leave that on the screen and track it through to the 2000 version. CLG 16012, please, page 90. This becomes 13.7 in that year, in that version. And let's have that at the same time. And you can see, well, you can't yet. That's CLG 16012, page 90. Can we please have 89? Back a page, yes, thank you. And expand that a bit, right on the right-hand side, external wall construction. And you see the second paragraph there, in a building, yes?
Yes.
In a building with a story 18 metres or more above ground level, insulation material used in ventilated cavities in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility. See Appendix A.
Yes.
You see that? Now, comparing the two, do you accept that in 2000, the effect of that change in the language in the second paragraph under what became 13.7 was a reduction of the circumstances in which the guidance asked for insulation to be of limited combustibility?
Yes, in the context of the paragraph we have just discussed. And as I say, this document, what became the 2000 approved document, had gone out to consultation before my arrival in the department. But as part of looking over paperwork in the inquiry, I'm unable to find a version of the consultation document that might have suggested why that might have happened.
Do you know yourself why there was a narrowing of the circumstances in which insulation was required to be of limited combustibility in the 2000 edition?
No, I do not. But, sir, if I could just refer you to paragraph 13.7, the first paragraph.
Yes.
Notwithstanding the provision specifically in relation to the location of insulation and the height of the building, the first paragraph is also a hugely important provision within the approved document, which sets out from the outset the external envelope of a building should not provide a medium for fire spread if it is likely to be a risk to health or safety. It then goes on in terms of the use of combustible materials for cladding framework and similar, and then talks at the end, may present a risk in tall buildings, even though the provisions for external surfaces in diagram 40 may have been satisfied.
Yes.
And so, from my reading of the approved document, whilst the specific provisions do refer to less instances of thermal insulation being of limited combustibility, you still have to be mindful of the paragraph above, that actually you need to look at each individual building on its merits, and where it might be seen to be an issue, you need to consider whether you need to provide a greater degree of materials of limited combustibility in a building.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and thank you. And we will see what happens to that as we trace through the amendments later in your evidence. But for the time being, I think, is this right, that the words you've just read to us helpfully are the same in 13.7 in 2000 as they were in the first paragraph of what was 12.7 in 1992, with I think the only difference being the diagram number.
Yes.
Yes, that remained the same. And therefore, although the general principle remained the same, there was nonetheless, it seems, a narrowing of the requirement for insulation material in the external wall construction, now only to be in ventilated cavities.
I'd suggest that there's been a narrowing of the provision. However, I would wish to raise, and maybe it will come up further when we start looking at maybe the approved document B 2006, that there would still be a need, even reading these provisions, to ensure that you've met the functional requirement.
Well, indeed so. And I'm going to come to that right now.
Okay.
I think the answer to my question, though, however, is taking into account the first paragraph of 12.7 and then 13.7, nonetheless, the restriction or the requirement for materials of limited combustibility, so far as concerned insulation, was narrowed in 2000. Turning to the functional requirement, do you recall that was amended because in 1992 the requirement was that the external walls of the building shall resist the spread of fire over the walls, but in 2000 that became the external walls of the building shall adequately resist the spread of fire over the walls. You remember that?
I can recall, and I believe it might have happened as part of a consolidation exercise of the regulations, that in doing so, departmental lawyers looked over all parts of Schedule 1 of the building regulations, all the technical parts. And it was at that point such words as adequate and reasonable were added, I believe, to most of the provisions, the functional requirements B1 to B5, as that would bring them into line with the other extant functional requirements for the other technical parts of the building regs, where they are predicated.
Right. Well, let's focus then on this particular functional requirement, B4. Can we put those up on the screen simultaneously? Let's have the 1992 version on the left. We could take down what we've got there and put up BLA 405482, page 72, and at the same time, the 2000 version, CLG 16012, page 86. Right, we've got it. Right, now left-hand side, 1992, external fire spread, B41. The external walls of the building shall resist the spread of fire over the walls and from one building to another, having regard to the height, use and position of the building. On the right-hand side, 2000 version, external fire spread. The external walls of the building shall adequately resist the spread of fire over the walls and from one building to another, having regard to the height, use and position of the building. So identical words, other than the insertion of the word adequately, yes?
Yes.
Now, you told us that there was a schematic rationale for using the word adequately. Was there a specific rationale for inserting the word adequately in this functional requirement?
As I say, from recollection, it was a consolidation of the building regs by the departmental lawyers, and these predications went in across Part B, as I understand it, in line with the same way other functional requirements are predicated in other parts of Schedule 1.
Yes. Do you remember in 2000 any discussion along the lines of whether the insertion of the word adequately relaxed the requirement to any extent?
I don't recall any such discussions on that basis. If at all possible, what follows the functional requirements are normally performance statements by the Secretary of State as to how one can show compliance with these functional requirements. Would it be helpful, possible, to put those side by side as well, sir?
Yes, I think it would. If we go, please, to page 73 on the left-hand side and page... 73 on the right-hand side there. Sorry, left-hand side, yes. And the following page, which I think is 87 on the right-hand side. Thank you. Yes, there they are. And can you...
Thank you.
Can you see how that helps us in any way?
It does, because when people have asked me previously, and it's not been for a very long time, what is adequate or reasonable, I always start with the overarching Building Act and the building regulations. And the regulations talk in the context of Part B of the building regulations, is that they relate to the health and safety of people in and around buildings and firefighters engaged in search and rescue. So with that understanding, reading the functional requirement that you've just kindly shown, I then suggest people move into read the performance statements, and they both appear to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
If the external walls are constructed so that the risk of ignition from an external source and the spread of fire over their surfaces is restricted by making provision to have low rates of heat release. So the performance statements didn't change. And so I'm unable to answer why departmental lawyers did what they did, but I'd go to suggest that nothing thereafter changed. You were still considering what else is identical between 92 and 2000.
Yes. I mean, do you accept that taking the functional requirement as amended by the insertion of the word adequately, there was a risk that the reader might not turn the page and think that the performance requirement had been diluted in some way, so that it went from an absolute requirement, by reference admittedly to the performance requirements, to a relative one?
Typically, you can't look at any part of the building regulations or the statutory guidance in isolation. And so I would like to think a competent professional, whatever they be, designer, building control or similar, if they did look at the change in the functional requirement, or they acknowledge that, they would then do what we've just done now, to have a look into the document itself,
right,
to try and work out what else has been suggestive in terms of the Secretary of State's view.
So is your evidence that in fact, the intended addition of the word adequate was really to have no effect at all, because the performance requirements remained the same? It was just a lawyer's thing?
For recollection, yes, to bring it into line to the other predications offered to the other technical parts of the building regs.
Right.
But that doesn't really solve the problem of precision, does it? Because you're then left with provision for the walls to have low rates of heat release. And how low is required to satisfy that?
That's a very fair comment, sir. But I presume, again, harking back to what I said about the legal locus, you'd have to relate that to it amounting to life safety, because the building regs, for example, don't cover pure economic loss or property protection. So what you might need to do to achieve life safety, you can then, as we know and has been discussed in the inquiry, sir, the approved documents are but one way of potentially showing compliance. They can tend to show compliance, but for some of the more common situations, and thereby what you can do is look at the provisions, what's asked for thereafter within the guidance, to see if you take that as what is tantamount to being acceptable and adequate for common situations. But I do recognise the issue you raised, sir.
I mean, in the end, it might be thought that in each case it will be a question of what degree of risk you're prepared to tolerate. But the Minister hasn't given very much assistance on that.
I could see how some people might read it that way. But from experience, having worked in terms of building control and then as a regulator in the department, from my understanding, they would move into the document and the body of technical guidance, and they would use that as potentially an equivalence if they are, they feel in terms of a designer, because it's their duty to show compliance, or building control for them to check as to what has been provided is sufficient to meet the functional requirement and the performance. But I can understand the point you raised, sir.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. I know that it's 2 minutes to 4:30, but I just want to explore something a little bit with you.
Yes.
Perhaps we should just keep the 2000 version up on the screen and go back a page if we can, and just have the functional requirement there. No, the one on the right-hand side, I think, is the 2000 edition. If we can flick back, please, to that. The word adequately there. And it's adequately having regard to the height, use and position of the building, isn't it?
Yes.
So does that tell us, and I don't want you to embark on an exercise of interpretation of the guidance, but was the understanding in the department at the time that the word adequately was adopted, that what was adequate would vary from building to building depending on the height, use and position of the building?
Yes.
Yes. And then going to the performance requirement, chasing this through, next page please, picking the chairman's point up a little bit and running with it a bit further, does that tell us that the low rates of heat release, the degree of tolerability of rates of heat release would also depend upon the height, use and position of the building?
I think that would be a fair assumption, sir.
And if the reference to rates of heat release was a reference to class 0 and diagram 40, does that tell us that the appropriateness of class 0 in any given case would depend upon the height, use and position of the building?
It would. And if, again, referring back to the Section 13 guidance, in terms of where there were concerns that actually the functional requirement might not be met just by following the provision of installation of limiting combustibility within ventilated cavities, you could look and think, actually, no, you need to go above and beyond that. So in addition to that provision. I mean, if it helps, and I don't wish to extend the discussion, but the way the approved documents and the functional system has always worked is that you look at the approved document and its applicability to the design that is being undertaken or being checked. And if you think the common guidance doesn't really deal with that situation, you revert back to the functional requirement and then into the performance statement, which does mean and I did it as a building control officer, you can ask for provisions that go above and beyond what's in the guidance for the more common building situations.
Yes. Now, do you agree, in the light of what you've just told us and this exercise that we've been going through, that adequate, by reference to performance requirements, which takes you into class naught, in the context of a building with a stay-put policy there, should mean no flame spread?
Not necessarily, no.
So was there, in the light of that answer, some degree of tolerance, even with a building with a stay-put policy in place, that there could be some flame spread, external flame spread, having regard to the height use and use of the building?
Yes, and examples of where that can happen is that you can get fire spreading up, depending upon climatic condition, fire rolling up the face of masonry buildings, brick buildings. What you're trying to do is limit the propensity for fire spread to afford more time for the brigade to arrive and deal with the situation. And by controlling the propensity for fast fire spread and the jumping from window into a fire compartment, starting a fire, jumping to a next window, you can slow that entire process down.
Now, let's be careful to distinguish between fire spread from floor to floor up a masonry building as a result perhaps of the Coanda effect, yes,
Yes, sir.
with a cladding system on fire. Do you appreciate that there's a difference?
Yes.
Now, my question is, in the light of the risk of flame spread from a cladding on fire, do you agree that adequate in that context, where there is a building with a stay-put policy, means no flame spread? In other words, no cladding on fire at all?
No, I believe there would still be the propensity for fire spread. That could still be allowed, albeit by, depending upon the specification, it is a controlled fire spread. It is not a fast burn.
And what would tell the architect, the designer, or the building control officer how much external flame spread in or through the cladding system was permissible to make such flame spread adequate if the building had a stay-put policy in place?
Again, I'd revert you back to the provisions in the actual approved documents itself in terms of the guidance in paragraph 13.6 that suggested where it is an issue to have. Would it be possible to see 13.6 again?
Yes, of course, absolutely.
Thank you.
Let's go back on the right-hand side, please, one page, page 86. Oh, no, I've got that wrong. No, that's the requirement. Yes, I think you need to go to page 89. Yes, page 89.
Thank you, sir. The external envelope of a building should not provide a medium for fire risk if it is likely to be a risk to health or safety. The use of combustible materials for cladding framework or similar, or combustible thermal insulation as an overcladding or in ventilated cavities may present such a risk in tall buildings, even though the provisions for external surfaces in diagram 40 may have been satisfied.
Yes.
So by virtue of that provision, that where it is felt, and that would be a discussion quite often between a designer and a building control body, that by just following the guidance that follows in diagram 40 and the second paragraph here, actually more might need to be done in terms of affording greater provision to the cladding system in its entirety.
Now, what you've just told us very helpfully just now in the last 10 minutes, was that your understanding of approved document B in 2000?
In terms of the ability to look at a situation and decide that because I've got something that might not be a typical situation, I have some concerns about some of the materials being used, Could I then revert back to the function requirement and the performance statement? Then the answer is yeah.
Now, given, and help me with this, given that the assumption in any stay-put strategy is that flame will not spread beyond the compartment of origin, do you agree that any vertical flame spread across or through the facade would fundamentally undermine all the other design assumptions forming the basis of that stay-put strategy?
That's not my understanding, sir. If we look at BR 135 and the guidance that definitively offered as a recommendation that it needed to be updated from the Select Committee, that recognises the potential effect of fire spread, but by controlling the degree of fire spread over time, affords greater time to operational firefighters in search and rescue. And that is in BR 135 Part 2.
So does it come to this, therefore, that as a result perhaps of Fire Note 9 in 2000 and 8414 later, a degree of fire spread in a cladding system was entirely possible without undermining the design assumptions fundamental to the stay-put strategy, and which would keep it within the meaning of the word adequate?
Yes.
I see. Mr. Chairman, I think mid-document, but probably not mid-topic now,
No.
which I think we've now covered. But I'm going to ask for the break at that stage. We'll come back to this document on Monday morning, if we may.
Yes, of course. Well, Mr. Burd, we've gone slightly longer than usual this afternoon, but it was an interesting
I'm
topic
grateful.
to explore. We'll break at that stage. I'm going to have to ask you to come back, I'm afraid, on Monday, and we'll resume at 10 o'clock on Monday. And again, I must ask you not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the break. All right?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 10 o'clock on Monday, then, please.